My name's Georgia Hill and I'm an artist and illustrator from Sydney here at Talkshops at Commune. I kind of live in Sydney and travel a lot at the moment, but I was originally born in Waratah near Newcastle. So I grew up in a place called Maitland, which is pretty country, pretty regional, and came to Sydney for uni to study Viscom. And from that, I kind of went through design, lettering, illustration, and went to Berlin, did an internship there, realized I was doing the same thing I hated in a different country, which didn't actually solve anything. So a lot of crying, had no money, came back and got back to Sydney. Next slide. And I wanted to gloss over a lot of the beginning stuff because I have talked about that before. But for me, getting back from Berlin was where a lot of things kind of started. And I'm not sure about anyone else, but I worked to the point of frustration. So I know a lot of people who are like very motivated and seem to just get on with it and can kind of just grit their teeth and get things moving. But I work more in a way where I have to get so annoyed at myself that things like have to change tomorrow, which is a really ridiculous way, and I can see myself making mistakes, but I kind of have to feel this change has to happen. So I got back to Sydney from living overseas for about 18 months and realized I wasn't happy making work for other people. I wasn't happy doing other people's briefs or other people's ideas, and so I really dug my heels in that if I was going to come back to Sydney, I need to make this work my own stuff. So I just got stuck in really and decided the things I do like doing and that make me happy. And at that time, it was things like textures, lettering, and black and white work. And so I just really focused on that. Next slide. And I literally just worked on this nonstop, next slide, for the next like 2.5 years, really. And it was weird for me because I'd done quite well in uni. I'd done this really great year of work and freelance after uni as well, and I'd been overseas. And I kind of thought all these things would have made me what I was going to be, which was really ambitious at 22 to be like, I've done it, this is going to be great. And it took me coming back to get stuck in, and once I started to find my own style, all these things that I'd really, really wanted actually started to work out a bit better. And it was so rewarding that I was starting to get this attention for my work that I wanted, but it was for work I was actually proud of instead of work for other people. And so next slide. I've also forgotten what order my slides are in. So this eventually got to this point where I was invited to do a solo show for this gallery, The Tate, and that then turned into Good Space. And that's run by Chris Lautfi. And that was really so exciting for me because it was kind of the first time I got into this group of people who were doing work that I'd really admired and been looking at since I was like 16 and catching the train from Newcastle into Sydney to go to exhibitions and like drink because no one knew how old I was. And I thought that was like the scariest, exciting thing I could possibly do. So to start having shows in these spaces that were so untouchable and then you kind of like reach these levels was really exciting, but it also showed me that you can actually kind of really get stuck into this stuff and get it done. So after uni, instead of getting a real job, I worked in an Irish pub for another 6 months and again got to that point of frustration where I was like, I'm not an idiot, I'm not Irish, I don't want to work here anymore. And then like literally just quit, and the next day entered like 3 different competitions and really just started pushing my artwork anywhere, next slide, people would take it. And yeah, this eventually got to this point where I was experimenting really heavily with really simple tools and this limited palette. And I found that by putting these limits on myself, I actually was getting somewhere with it. Like I kind of had set these rules for myself to work in that meant it felt like I was getting things right. Because especially with creative work, it can seem so endless. Like the options you have, the things you can make is where do you actually decide to stop. And so I was finally coming to these solutions really quickly when my options were less. Next slide. Sorry, I'll stop saying next slide. Back. And this thing I'd been looking at the whole time as well from working with Chris at the Tate and exhibiting at Good Space was that I was really excited about this idea of mural work and large-scale work. And this had been picking up traction like all through Australia and the world really, but I was not embarrassed of not knowing how to do it because I really have no idea, but I wanted my work to be something I liked enough to put on a scale that big. And so it was really great. I finally got to that point where I felt like my work was what I meant for it to be. And at this point, it's not the most meaningful thing I've ever done, but I was starting to make something that felt like I was just really reflecting how I felt at the time. And so this was in Redfern. on a wall near the Lord Gladstone, and now that's turned into a Scott Marsh sounding board where he posts these really like fantastic artworks he creates pretty much every other month about what's going on politically in Australia. Sorry. Yeah. So it's good. It's you get these spaces to show what you're doing, and it turns into everyone working on it, which I really love because it is this collaborative thing where it's not about your work staying up as long as possible. It's more just about doing it and getting on with it, and then you move on to the next thing and kind of grow with quantity rather than quality sometimes. This was a wall in Perth that I got to do with a friend, Sherry Wilson, and she runs Sherry Wilson Projects. And this for me was so exciting because it was the kind of thing I've heard about Perth. Everyone told me it was like paradise. And I was like, that sounds great. And I'd never actually gotten to go there. And then my first time going there was to paint this wall. Originally it was for a street festival, and it was meant to be half the size of the wall because there was graffiti, there's a lot of tagging on there, and the shop owner was like, I just want that part gone. But on the day we turned up, the lift was big enough to go to the top, and I have realised this about the work I do, is even if people tell me it just needs to be half or it just needs to be like this much, I really want it to be more. And I think that is something that helps so much, and I'm sure with all of these guys too, is people have expectations or might ask you for something, but for me it's more about what you think of yourself or what you can see yourself doing. And so even though this was like, it was like 45 degrees and I missed out on like the cocktails and the weird like drinking in the bush and the pool parties because I decided I wanted to paint to the top. To me, like getting this stuff done was more important than the other things I could be doing. And I think that's how so many people's brains start to be wired, is like the more you see yourself do, these other things kind of fall to the side a bit more. Next slide. This was in Adelaide with Vanzi Omega. Joel Van Moore was running Wonder Walls, which is another thing that was a goal for me. And again, this point of frustration. I got back from Berlin and was sitting at my kitchen table, like yelling at my sister that it's so unfair that I'm not allowed to go and paint these big festivals and that this hasn't happened for me yet. And these things that have happened have actually been goals that I've had in mind and you set for yourself. And I think that's something that's really important and that I put off for a long time. Was I always thought that goals were kind of this corny Dear Diary thing where to vocalize what you actually want, I always thought it was this scary thing because people could eventually point that out to you that you hadn't achieved it. But then actually when you start letting people know what you want to do and where you see yourself, people can actually get on board with that and be like, oh, I know you actually wanted to try this, or it's not exactly what you said, but it's a step towards it. And I think that's so important, is having people, letting them come on board with you is so rewarding, and then you can also do that for them. And it really makes things start to build even more. And again, things like Wonder Walls got me to meet Joel, people like Elliot Routledge and Brad Eastman, who's over in Bali now. And this also turned into this thing I'd been like kind of wishing for, that I was able to travel for work. So this was for Tropica, which was a festival in Bali. And this was a really kind of important wall for me. It's not the best work I've ever done, but it was the first time I'd ever kind of turned up in another country ready to paint, and everything was so limited, which was so rewarding. Like I was actually able to cope with what I had rather than being like, oh, if I don't have this kind of paintbrush, I can't do it. Or if I can't reach, then it's not an option. But it's so rewarding that kind of like you see yourself every day. You don't see yourself get further, but eventually you get to these points where I wouldn't have been able to handle this a year before. I would have just been crying and like melting. And so instead I was melting and not actually like freaking out. Next one. And yeah, this also turns into things where this was terrifying to do, and also to work with Nami was something I never thought would happen because our styles are really different, and I'm so into black and white and he's so into red and blue. And it's also quite intimidating to have someone who's an artist that you've looked at and you admire their work. And this becomes something I think no matter what field you work in, eventually you start to work alongside the people you've aspired to be. And that's really exciting but also scary, because suddenly you're like, feel like you have to actually prove you can do this thing. And it's so much of it is like it was mentioned before, that you just have to get on with it, and it's only from then you can start kind of fixing things or find mistakes or get to the next stage. But if you kind of spend all your time fretting, you don't actually come up with it. So we did this, Sam, like for Commune, told us he'd gotten this space, he wanted to see us do a collaboration, and we'd actually never planned to do it before. And I spent 3 weeks trying to put it off, being like, surely I am not the person for this. And eventually Nami and I, we just got a Photoshop file going, we just mashed our stuff together. And then over 4 freezing days, we just churned it out. And it turned into this really successful collaboration. And we got to travel to Perth, we got to do another interior mural, we've done a few things together now. And it's been this thing where it's not just about the work that was produced, but it's the people you get to meet and the friendships and connections and motivation you also get from them. So yeah, again, I pretty much just took to this painting work the same way I took to illustration in the first place. And I wanted to get better, get faster, do bigger things. And it was really hard for me, and I was quite concerned that I don't have a graffiti background. I grew up in Maitland, they are known for trains. Steamfest is the #1 tourist thing in Maitland, but I've never done a graffiti in my life. And so I really felt like I had something to prove, that I could go out and paint and do it well and do it how I saw it in my mind. And eventually it got to this point where I realized I don't need to do it how other people do. Your own point of view is so unique and so special, and that's where creative work starts to become this next thing and this way you're actually set apart from other people. And so I really just took every opportunity I could. This one up the top, I asked this guy who was the intern at Good Space to show me how to paint, and I felt like a 45-year-old mum being like, how does this work? What is going on? And that wall got painted over the next day, because apparently it's a heritage listed wall where a pub stores their garbage. I don't understand. But it's so crazy, because some things this wall was meant to last 2 weeks, and then it was up there for 1.5 years. Other things are made to be there for a night, and that's how long they last. They literally get torn out the next day. But I think it's so important that it taught me, how to value things myself, and also to think about what I actually want from it. So I went really uni student with this and did word slides. And all of this, more and more, I keep coming back to this question of what do I actually want? And all the time it seems to be I don't want to do just other people's ideas. I don't want to do branding work all the time. I don't want to be digital. I don't want to be I do want to make money, but I don't want it to be about making money and compromising for that. I don't want to repeat myself. And so this also led me to the things that I actually really want to do, and this has started to shape things more and more. And again, this comes back to me feeling so nervous about being honest about what I want, but then the more honest you are, the more this actually starts to come back to you. And I really believe that what you're putting out there is what you get back as well. And I think that's been proven with every creative I've met. And it's as simple as even your attitude, if you're positive or you're negative, that actually shapes what's going on around you. And so I really started to focus on just drawing and painting, the idea of place and memory, structures and environment, making sure this work is pushing myself, art over design work, and process over product. So next slide. And this got me to this point lately where I've become really focused on 3 really particular themes, which is about structures and buildings, environments, and also kind of mental space. And so I realized with all this wall stuff, it's been so good for me, because I didn't know why I got into it, and I didn't know if it was right, and I didn't know if I was trying to do this street art thing and it's a bit cool and it's now, and it's not actually where I should be. But then I've realized that I'm so passionate about these places we exist in and the world we're in and how we actually move through it. And for me, that's buildings, that's walls, that's it can be as simple as cracks in the pavement, or it can be an entire building that you don't even realize is there in front of you until someone treats it differently or paints it, or for all you know, something horrible happens. But it's these structures where our histories exist and our experiences become real. Next slide. And also that the environment is this for us as well. And when you combine these 2 things, you actually get to everything we do. It's memory, it's experience, it's how we connect with people, and how we use our communities as well. And it's this kind of visual language that's always there, but we don't always tie into so much. So this led me to doing The Wanderers with Selena Miles and Drew McDonald. And Selena is, in my super biased opinion, the best photographer, video, filmmaker coming up. And she got a grant to make a 6-part series for ABC iView. And so she literally emailed 6 artists and just asked us if we could visualize our work in a physical, real location, where would that be? And I felt really lucky to get to do this, because it kind of sped up how I was looking at myself, and I kind of freaked out because it was like having someone ask you, what are you actually about? Or in other words, is like, are you full of shit? And I got really worried because I was like, I don't actually know what I'm trying to say with my work. And so it was actually this perfect timing where someone posed that question to me, and I was like, this is actually what I want to talk about. I don't want to just paint walls for no reason or to fill in my time. I want to have a bigger message with this. Next one. So we went to this tiny town called Tarraleah, and it was set up as a hydro town. It's in the central highlands of Tasmania, and it's basically empty. There's like 3 people in the whole town that used to be this. It has like 38 houses and a church and a school. And we got there and it was just dense fog. There's no people. It was just the 5 of us and like as much wine as we remembered to bring. And it was one of the best experiences, especially that before that I'd done my first job where I'd kind of set up everything myself, from lift to paint to accommodation to car hire. And it was good to get through that and kind of be a bit shaky, but I survived that. And then literally have like Callie and Selena throw me in a car and be like, we're ready, everything is sorted out, you just have to do your one job. And it was so great to kind of realize this stuff comes in all shapes and sizes as well. Like sometimes you have a team who's there to support you, and other times you can actually do it on your own, and that's just the same thing, it's just about getting on with it. So this started this series of works where I was really, really hyped about space, place, and memory. And this led to the project I did with pretty much for Elliot and I painting the front of Commune. We didn't want to put a price on it, so we said if we can have the space to have an exhibition, we'll do that. And if you've seen the Commune, the space is gigantic. And Elliot and I were in Perth painting another project. It was raining for like the first 2 days. And then we were just freaking out. We were like, we actually have to fill this space with stuff. And we were running out of time, and I pretty much got to a point for my half of the warehouse. I was like, I want this to be big, I want it to be high impact, I want to use fabric, but I want to make it even harder for myself and shoot everything before we even get into the space. So I made it about these works where in a natural element, and then this, which was out at Guatemala, and this man-made element, which was the warehouse here at Commune, that it's about memory and reflection and how we carry that with us in different environments. So I pretty much harassed people and had to, I feel like all these projects, you kind of get to this next hard part, and like I said, I get to the point of frustration, but I had to ask for help, which is something like I'm not really good at doing. And I had to ask 3 of my friends to help me not only go out to Guatemala at 4 a.m., but help me hang these flags. This thing is 25 meters long, and it fell off the cliff, and like we were hanging it with like I don't know, 6mm rope from Bunnings. That broke, everything broke. Everything was a mess, but these guys helped me hang like 7 flags to shoot out, where all I was thinking was like, someone's going to die or I'm going to get fined $40,000. And then we got to Commune, and we all thought everything would take like a day to set up, and it took 2.5 days. And it's just amazing to me to have these people support you kind of blindly, no matter how big your ideas are starting to get. And that's something that's been really important for me. Is I think you need to think that bit bigger every time, especially when it is your own work, because no one really is going to come to you and be like, let's see you make this stuff. You kind of have to prove you can do it first. So next one. This led to another project where immediately after the Commune show, I flew to New Zealand for Pangea Seed Foundation's Seawalls. And there, before I'd even met them, I know they do really good things, and I was really excited to go. I was also very nervous because it is like, to me, it's the biggest kind of mural festival going around, and they have such a good purpose of what they're doing. And I got bumped off a wall for like an artist who is much better than me. And then they were like, we have this bridge you can paint if you want to paint a bridge. And like I said before, that it's when you want more, you kind of have to show you can do more. And they thought I was going to paint about 4 of these pylons, and instead I went all out and painted the whole bridge. So I wanted to make this message that was about, you have to physically interact with the environment to understand what it's trying to tell you, which is what Seawalls is about. You have to actually like be with the water, listen to everything that's going on, not in this hippie way, but just as common sense, like this is the world we live in. And so the bridge says, do for me what I do for you. And to be honest, it probably is backwards, but I managed to spin it with this concept that you have to physically walk around to understand what's going on. Next one. And that led me to them inviting me to go to Churchill in Canada. And I got really lucky this year that I got accepted to do a residency in Iceland for a month, which was just this phenomenal experience as well. But then to have gone to New Zealand, where I've never been, to Iceland, which is like another planet, and then go to Churchill, which is this town that has no roads going into it. There's only one plane in and a rail line. And the rail line was washed out because of this blizzard and flooding. And again, we were going there to kind of create these messages that are not just about sustainability and waterways, but also about the people who are actually there. And so I got to paint this abandoned Navy base or military base. It was about 130 meters long. I was out there on my own with a spray gun, basically, and one of the only working lifts that was going around. And it was really, for me, it was just a big deal because there were people who were definitely more capable than me, in my opinion, who could have been doing that and who were more important in the scheme of things. But then again, it got to this point where I was like, I've been given this opportunity, they gave me this space, I'm going to use it. And so we're in a town where there's like just dogs and like shitty trucks. And it was just like the most amazing experience to share that with those people, but to also have other people be like, all right, we're going to go to the hardware store and spend like the budget we don't have on the extra paint because you decided to do this ridiculous thing. And it was so nice to have these people kind of support me do this like biggest thing I've done so far. So yeah, I'm going back to my uni presentation. And I wanted to really focus on just some key points to wrap all of this up. Because I think these are things I didn't realize that I was even doing because I kind of thought it was all just painting and churning it out, but it does build these relationships in this industry that exists. I don't think networking is the way to put it. I think you should be making friends with people and actual connections. And I've realized that more and more that like the Perth job with Sherry Wilson, I'm going to her wedding next month. And that to me is like more important than any job she could give me or any like trip that could be offered. It's like that you actually get to start making friends with these people and that for me, I work like 6-7 days a week. And so if I'm going to work that much, I want the people I work with to be people I want to spend time with. And I think that should be the way, like, not that you should work all the time, but you should love what you do and the people who are there with you. I think going out and being a real person is so important, like especially things even just like this is you don't know who you're going to meet, what you'll hear, where these things could go. And those physical, real connections are so much more, I think, than just being a name on a screen or trying to reach out in like a DM. To me, being informed is the most important part, and I really think you have to keep yourself updated on what's happening and who's doing what. For one, just to make sure, not that you're ahead, but you're not repeating things that are going on. Like so much stuff is online and regurgitated at the moment that, for me, it pushes you forward, but it also lets you know who else is kind of there in your world. And it supports this second point, to be ready for these opportunities, that it's like, you link up with people and you do this work and you might have this goal in mind and you don't know how far away that is, but it's as simple as if you want to be doing branding for this company, if you're not even making logos to start with, they're not going to approach you. It's like if you're making this thing, you're already ready, like you're already ready for that day that they come to you. I think keeping clients is a weird one, and I try to do the same thing as networking, is like make them friends and make them people you actually want to be around. The biggest shock for me is that all of this takes time. Like I didn't have that fresh out of high school, got the dream job, and that was like, it all happened straight away. But then over time, I've had these opportunities to work with brands who I really admire, and that kind of lifestyle I believe as well, which I think is more important than just saying you want to work for a brand, but not actually being about that either. I am very guilty of giving myself a really hard time, and it's that idea that more people know what you're doing than you probably think. And it's not about telling everyone all the time, but I think if you work really diligently and just keep going, that says more than trying to like scream it from the rooftops. I think the proof is in what you produce. Be nice and straightforward about time, money, and expectations. I think that's a big one, especially for females working, is you do get to this point where you want it to happen and you want to feel nice. And I hate that that exists sometimes, that there are two worlds, but the more upfront you are about things at the beginning, like the smoother things go and things are just a bit easier. And you kind of learn, you do it once and then you think you're fine, and then sometimes you get bit, and it's the fastest way to learn, really. And show you are more than your work. Like, part of it is personality, but part of it is like, if you really believe in different things, like it might be the environment, it might be something, that little extra thing, but often more and more that's what's actually important. Sorry. I don't really do many in-house projects in the way that they're for clients or for money, But again, quickly, there were things I said before that I think you need to do things that are beyond what you think you can even really do. Have deadlines so you actually stick to what you say you'll do. Don't repeat yourself and don't copy other people. And think about who you want to see and why and where you want that work to end up, because that's actually where these things do lead to. Like I said, if you're making logos but you wish you were painting murals, those worlds struggle to kind of meet up. You need to like push yourself to where you actually want to see your work exist. I think staying motivated is the biggest thing in staying inspired. And like Jimmy was saying, it's this momentum that you start to build. So I make sure really often to look outside of what I actually do. And so even though there's artists I admire, I look a lot at more of like the work ethic of people or read interviews of what they do rather than looking at what their work is. Because I often think that the why they're creating things can be more interesting than the what they've actually made. Setting your own projects and getting off the internet kind of goes together, because it's so easy when you're seeing what everyone else is producing, you assume that's what is going to get you somewhere, but it's actually these points of difference that are starting to become even more important. And I also think that having the more dimension ties into that. Like I said, if you're passionate about something, that might actually be the key to your work pushing to that next point that you haven't even realized yet. Know when to say no, but also use that time, which for me, I'm really lucky I've gotten to the point I can say no to projects, but I need to use that time for myself, because it feels like a bonus. If you've kind of said no to something that would have taken 2 weeks, it's easy to kind of like lay off and feel like you've done a good thing for yourself because you said no, and you're not going to like waste your time on something that isn't your vibe. But you need to use that time for yourself. Like that's the whole reason you said no to it. Don't just like sit on what you're used to. And again, just setting your own bar higher. Those expectations of yourself are what actually drives all of us, all these people who work in your own world for yourself. And that's it. Thank you for having me.